Welcome to our explainer on the organization of an ecosystem. We are going to be hitting all the key points from AQA section 4.7.2 just to make sure you are 100% ready for your exam. Okay, let's dive right in. Here's what we're covering. We'll kick things off with producers, the guys who power all life. Then we'll follow the energy through food chains, see how essential materials get recycled, meet the all-important decomposers, and finally, we'll get into the practical skills you need to actually study an ecosystem. But hang on, before we get into all that, let's just pause and think about the biggest, most fundamental question of all. It sounds simple, right? But believe me, the answer is the key to this entire topic.
And the answer starts right here with the producers. You can think of them as the powerhouses for literally every single ecosystem on this planet.
Okay, here's a definition you absolutely have to know for your exam. A producer, which is usually a plant or some algae, is an organism that makes its own food. They do this through photosynthesis, taking the sun's energy and using it to make glucose. They are, quite literally, building the foundation for every food chain from scratch.
And that leads to this crucial point. Biomass is just the total mass of living stuff. And producers, they create all of it. So every single living thing, from a tiny bacterium to a massive blue whale, ultimately depends on the biomass that was first made by these producers.
So producers have made all this biomass, this energy store. But how does that energy actually get passed around the ecosystem? Well, that brings us neatly to food chains. You see, energy moves along a food chain in these clear steps. It all starts with the producer, then a primary consumer, that's an herbivore, comes along and eats it. Then they get eaten by a secondary consumer, and so on up the chain, often ending with what we call an apex predator right at the top.
And this whole who eats who thing gives us two more key terms you've got to be comfortable with. The one doing the hunting is the predator, and the animal that gets eaten is the prey. Yep, simple as that.
Now, what's really cool is how these predator and prey populations are so closely linked. They create these classic cycles. So if the number of prey goes up, the predators have tons of food, right? So their numbers increase. But more predators means more prey gets eaten, and the prey population drops. Less food then causes the predator numbers to fall, and the whole cycle starts all over again. It's this endless dance that's a huge driver of evolution. Okay, this next idea is so important. You need to get this straight. Energy flows through an ecosystem. It comes in from the sun and is eventually lost as heat. But the actual physical stuff, the atoms that make up every living thing, they aren't lost. They are constantly being recycled. This is one of the fundamental rules of ecology. The carbon atoms that make up your body right now have been around for billions of years. They've been part of dinosaurs, bacteria, plants, you name it. In nature, nothing is ever wasted.
Now for your GCSE, there are two really important cycles you need to get your head around, the water cycle and the carbon cycle. They show us how these essential materials move between the living, or biotic, parts of an ecosystem and the non-living, or abiotic parts.
Let's just zoom in on the carbon cycle for a second. So plants grab carbon dioxide from the air to do photosynthesis. That carbon then gets passed up the food chain when animals eat the plants. Eventually, through respiration, that's breathing out, and the work of decomposers, that same carbon gets released back into the atmosphere as CO2, ready for the whole cycle to start again.
And that process of recycling brings us to a group of organisms that are often overlooked but are absolutely essential for any ecosystem to work. I'm talking about the decomposers, nature's cleanup crew. So what exactly are decomposers? Well, they're microorganisms, like bacteria and fungus, and their job is to break down all the dead material and waste products. As they do this, they release vital mineral ions back into the soil and carbon back into the atmosphere. Honestly, without them, all those nutrients would stay locked up, and the ecosystem would just grind to a halt. Now, how fast these decomposers can work really depends on their environment. They work much faster when it's warmer and when there's plenty of water and oxygen around. Why? Because those are the perfect conditions for the enzymes inside them that actually do the work of breaking things down. And those conditions lead us to two main types of decay. When there's oxygen, we call it aerobic decay. That's how we make compost for the garden. But if there's no oxygen, you get anaerobic decay. It's a much slower process and it produces methane gas, which we can actually use as biogas. Definitely pay attention to this slide, because this is a classic comparison question in exams. So that's all the theory. But how do scientists actually go out and study all these complex relationships in the real world? Well, this brings us to a required practical that you really need to know inside and out for your exam.
The main tool ecologists use to measure how many organisms are in an area is called a quadret. It's really just a square frame, but it's a simple and super powerful way to take a small sample that represents a much bigger area.
And this four-step method is something you've got to remember. First, and this is key, you place the quadrat randomly. This is to avoid bias. Second, you count up the organisms you're interested in that are inside the frame. Third, you do this again and again and again. Repeating it lots of times makes your results reliable. And finally, you calculate the mean, which gives you a good estimate of the population density.
Calculating the mean is easy peasy. Let's say you were counting daisies, and in 3 different 1 meter squared quadrats, you found 10, then 8, then 12. You just add them up, which gives you 30, and divide by the number of quadrats you used, which was 3. So your estimated mean population density is 10 daisies per square meter.
Okay, so let's wrap this all up. If there's one thing you take away from this for your revision, it's this. Ecosystems are all about 2 big processes. First, energy flows. It comes from the sun, goes through the producers, and up to the consumers. Second, materials are cycled. The building blocks of life are used over and over again, mostly thanks to the hard work of decomposers.
And let's end on this thought. This isn't just theory for an exam. These cycles have kept our planet stable and alive for millions of years. Understanding how they work is absolutely vital, because we need to know what the consequences are when we start messing with them, before it's too late.